Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! And a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal are in front.
Huge news. I think it's something that for some people they'll say they saw it coming. Other people will have been blindsided by it, didn't even know anything like this could be possible. It's been a long time in the making if you really think about it, but it is time for us to break it down detail by detail and cover the massive breaking news that is our 300th episode. This is the Arsenal Vision Post-Match Podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. It's 300 episodes. If you've been with us the whole way, seek help. Call a number. There are people for you. It can be treated. We can wean you up. No, we're thrilled. Thank you. If you've been with us for one episode, 300 episodes, or anywhere in between, we love you. We appreciate you. We say it all the time, and we absolutely mean it, except you. You know what you did. Yeah, it's great. It's a milestone that we get to punctuate, and I was so worried because I was like, it's been a quiet summer. We'll have to just come up with something for the 300th episode. We were going to do some navel-gazing, meta-podcasting, what it's like to be on the podcast, and then thank Sky Wizard Koscielny quit the club. So there you go. We got something to talk about. So we just want to say before we dive into this that we appreciate you even more than a captain of Arsenal appreciates the club. We love you. We are so thrilled that you're here. For those of you who caught up with our Patreon podcast this week, I know internal processes is something that we're all tossing around in our mind, trying to understand what that means. And Paul can certainly expand on that further. If you haven't heard about that, we can dive into it. But Paul is in fact here. You can find him on Twitter at Paz No My Pants. Hello, Paz.
Yes, in the words of Jesus, we are more worried about the one sheep that we've lost than the 19.
Great. Good. You know what I love about the 300th episode?
Pod listeners. Yeah.
The great thing is, in a lot of ways, the podcast has come, I think, a long way. I think it has developed into something really special and from humble beginnings. And in many ways, with your audio, it hasn't changed a bit. Tim's on Twitter at Stoberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Hello, indeed. I'm glad to have you back in the fold, my friend. And Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
I think, Clive, when you join the pod, that's what we call going from strength to strength. So we love you and appreciate you for being here.
Kind.
Okay, well, I guess we have to dive into it. Tim, I just want to get your take on it. I mean, how does it feel hearing that we have done 300 No, I'm kidding. Laurent Koscielny. So, legend, hero, captain, kiss the badge. We fight for the badge, except we don't go on tour and we strike and we breach our contract and we don't play for the club anymore. How do you feel about Laurent Koscielny not wanting to be at Arsenal?
So at first, I think we've known for a while, perhaps, that he doesn't really want to be here anymore. He did say that had he not been injured last year, he probably would have gone last summer. but it all seemed quite amicable. That's the weird thing. It just seemed like do you know what? I'm at the end of my career. My Achilles is knackered. I want to spend my last kind of year at home, as it were, which I think everyone kind of understood. And I don't think anyone would have begrudged him too much. But the surprise is obviously the strength of that feeling, which we hadn't. It was a massive shock when that news dropped this morning, UK time, because I don't think anyone quite realised how severe this was and how much the player and the club were at loggerheads. As for how I feel about Laurent Koscielny himself. As someone, we did that episode, didn't we, earlier in the summer about your favourites of the Emirates era, and I went quite big on Laurent Koscielny.
Yes, you did. You want to change your bullshit answer now?
Yeah. So I'm going to displace all of that affection and give it all to Bakary Sagna, I think. No. So the thing is that's really frustrating about this for me. I mean, first of all, I got a feeling that Clive might talk about this, so I'm going to leave that for him. But what it does for our image. And the image of Arsenal is very, very damaged, and this makes it even worse, particularly in quite a tricky summer. But the thing that's most frustrating for me is that we have such incomplete information. So we're left to guess why Arsenal felt the need maybe to make this statement. I'm guessing they just thought, well, he's not going to be here, and that's going to invite questions. So let's get ahead of the story, which in some respects I kind of think is fine. And using the injury excuse, if you're looking to sell him, probably not a great idea, because it puts off buyers. If you say, if they'd have said he's not coming on tour because his Achilles is knackered, I'm sure everyone would have believed that. But obviously then you're not going to get any money for him if you do that. But I mean, the thing for me is I don't know what the other side of the story is. In fact, we don't know any of the story other than, this bit, the end. So it's very, very difficult to get a proper read on it. And that's really frustrating, because like a little tiny bit of the story has been put out there. We might never get the rest of it. And so what it creates is this void, and what falls into a void? Speculation. And so there's just loads and loads of speculation, and we might never find out the truth. Like Fabregas happened 8 years ago, and we still argue about it, about what happened and what didn't happen and who was at fault. And it's just kind of frustrating, because on one hand it feels like the club are trying to be a bit transparent, but with about 2% of the detail. So it's very difficult to know what to think, other than nobody comes out of this looking very good, and that this means nothing good for Arsenal.
Yeah, I agree with all of that sentiment. And Clive, I think what's going to happen with this is it's going to be a perfect referendum on confirmation bias. Like, whatever your hobby horse is in terms of who you want to kick around, that's the person who you're going to see as deserving the blame here. So, you can blame the club if you're currently like anti-Arsenal because Arsenal is just a poorly run club, so I'm just going to blame the club. If you specifically have an issue with Raul, he's an easy target. Emery's a target. Koscielny's a target. There's sort of a lot of blame that could be shared around depending on how you want to share it. So if we try to strip away the bias, I mean, where do you think the locus of this problem rests? Do you first and foremost feel that the player has erred in taking the tack he has, or do you think maybe it's somewhere else?
Well said on the confirmation bias thing, because there's been a lot of silliness online today, shall we say, and people are just using it as a reason to confirm their own thoughts. I think for me, it's a shame. I generally think that Koscielny, the player, probably been one of the most important players of the Emirates era. So it's a shame that we are where we are. This situation has been in the post, right? That's why I've been saying that he's going to be going. I wasn't aware of his contractual situation, but I think this is a basic output from the changing cultures in the club. I think there was a time, I think me and Tim, we're talking online today, we shared tweets. Jack Wilshere would have got his contract last summer from Arsene Wenger, no doubt about it. Because he's one of the inside people, would have got his 120, 130k 4-year contract. And since he's left, I think he's played about 14 minutes, so he's costing West Ham that money right now. Right, so, and that was the environment that we had. We looked after our mates. That's why Carl Jenkinson's on 40 grand, wherever it is. We looked after our mates. Koscielny, no doubt, in the old regime, they wouldn't have extended the option. He would have got his free transfer. And he was no doubt negotiating with a number of French clubs to get his money to have the last 2+1 years in France. And a bit of me says, you know what? Great. But this is not that Arsenal anymore. This is an Arsenal that says, okay, we've had enough of people taking the mickey out of us. We have to hold a line. And maybe the first victim of that, perceived victim of that, was Aaron Ramsey. Right, so we held a line on him, and he was able to walk out of his head held high, even though the club were trying to get him to sign a contract for 2 years. So, and now we've got another person it's actually been held. Right, so I think it's all about the change in what we are, and there's a new football culture in place, and it's being run by Raul. And they said there's going to be harsh discipline in place around people that get to 2 years. And I think Arsenal are trying to control the narrative, which they did try to do with that message. And, listening to people talk about that message, did it need to happen? Did it not need to happen? That statement, sorry, did it need to happen? Did it not need to happen? I think, well, yeah, you know what? If that's your new behaviours and you're going to control it and you're going to hold people to account, then yeah, this is the first example of that. As long as this is consistent and we start to get to know the new club, then I'm all for it, right? Because for me, it's always club first. It's always club first. However, I gotta say, this guy's had a rough ride in the last few years, injury-wise. He played injured for the club for many, many, many games. He ended up rupturing his Achilles when he potentially could have captained his country to the World Cup. He missed that. He was the only major player to miss that. So he missed a major milestone in his life. He came back. We lost another player. He got back early and helped keep our season on track. It didn't quite end as it could have. And he's obviously been negotiating. And there's a line in that statement that says, we've had no offers to anybody else. And what they're really saying is, mate, you've been taking the mickey out of us. You've negotiated a deal on a free transfer. We haven't had any official approach from anybody else. So you're doing this in the background, and we're not having it. And they've let it all come out. Now, this is new for us, and it's really interesting to see the reaction of so many people today. And Elliot, your intro line into the question is perfect, mate. You captured it. And it really has made people lash out on their unhappiness with certain aspects of the club. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, the club brings it on themselves a little bit. I mean, look, it's not exactly Comunicado Oficial de Real Madrid, is it? Official statement from Arsenal, corner flag in the picture, and it's your captain has quit the fucking club. He's on strike. Yeah, it's not, I think if the summer felt a little smoother, if the season had ended a little better, there'd be more sympathy, but people are frustrated. And to be fair, I think there has been a good amount of the opprobrium directed at Koscielny for doing this, for not joining the tour, for going on strike to try to get his move. I think, obviously, Raul runs the club right now in terms of the football operations, and a lot of this rests on him too. I don't think you can just take a guy, look, if this is Lichtsteiner and he's got a year in his contract and he wants you to cancel it, put it in the paper shredder and forget it ever happened. But Koscielny is arguably the most important central defender at the club right now. Now, that is an indictment of our central defense, but it's reality. We can't just be letting him walk away for free. I mean, we're not in a position to do that. And the idea that he would expect that, I'm sorry you're disappointed, mate, but that's not how it works. What I want to ask you about, though, Paul, is the statement and is the way it's being handled publicly. In my mind, if I could draft the perfect way to handle a difficult situation like this, it would be for Arsenal to say to Koscielny, look, okay, don't come on the tour. We will try to get you sold. You just take a load off, relax, rest that Achilles. You're an important player for us. You're the captain of Arsenal Football Club. We can't let you walk. We do have you under contract, and resources are tight. If you care at all about this club, you'll understand that, but we will do everything in our power to get you sold without pushing for some obscene fee. Here's what we think we can get for you. We're going to go out and try to make it happen. In the meantime, we'll announce that you're not on tour because we're giving you extended rest because, you played a ton last season coming back from a major injury, and we feel you're better suited resting at Colney than coming to the United States. And that's how we'll handle it. And then, if we get near deadline day and we don't have a move lined up, you're going to have to stay with us. And maybe you can have it go that way. I wonder if Koscielny had maybe indicated to the club that he was just going to come out with it and get his narrative out there first if they didn't do this, but that's how I would have liked to have seen it go. The thing I don't understand, Paul, is at the moment that you decide to put out the statement that you're pissed at him, that he's done this, that he's on strike and this is reprehensible and he's in breach of his contract, I don't know if necessarily what you're trying to do is gain leverage to cancel his agreement, thereby getting money back that is essentially the same as a fee, but you certainly make it difficult to keep him this season. Once you put that statement out, you've turned the fans against him, or trying to. You've also really put the player in a tough spot to come back and play for the club. So how do you feel about the decision to put that statement out strategically?
Well, I think you did a pretty good summary there. I mean, they've done it for a certain amount of PR and CYA covering their arse in the anticipation that stuff was going to leak. And I guess they wanted to get ahead of it. And to Clive's point, if they're taking a different approach in taking a stand, both with the squad in terms of how Arsenal's going to be represented out there with a new, they got Edu coming in. Welcome to the club, Edu. For his first crisis of the
welcome aboard the Titanic. We think your first sail is going to be a great one.
Yeah, I was joking. This was part of his introduction training that they lay out for the new executives so they can get blooded in the Arsenal way. But if they thought it was going to be messy, if they thought it was going to impact on discipline, etc., maybe they thought this was the least worst situation. I don't actually think it makes that much difference. There's a lot of people going on about how this hampers us in the market, etc. The clubs who are going to buy him know everything about the situation. It's Rennes, it's Lyon, or Bordeaux, and I think one other club. They have each other's phone numbers, so it doesn't really matter to go out there and say, oh, he's got a bad leg, or he's not this, or he's not that, or he's not available, or he's got a tummy upset, or whatever. It doesn't impact his market value in any sense, I don't think. And it stops the slow drip of the rumors and the stories, etc. And people made jokes about how it said something like, and we're not going to answer any questions from here on in. And that's not what it says. It says we're not going to answer any questions for now. It's not great. It's not terrible. I don't think that part of it's the big deal. I think the message, the communique, looks a bit rushed and a bit short and a bit quick.
You don't think it's too aggressively anti-player if you really have any interest in trying to get him back into the fold for the season? I mean, if you're planning on holding the guy to his contract, you'd like for him to feel he's still welcome at the club, and you've really burned up his relationship with the fans by releasing this statement. He can't be captain. So what are you going to do? Strip him of the captaincy, fine him dock him 2 weeks' wages, and then be like, welcome back, buddy. You're starting against Newcastle. Like, how does that work?
Well, if they're gauging it right, then it was going to get ugly either way. If they thought the situation was, especially over the next week or two, they probably just didn't want this drip, drip, drip of, oh, the story's worse than they first said. Oh, it's even worse than they first said with their captain. And it is the captain. So you kind of got to take a position on the captain who doesn't show up. It's impacting your squad. You got to draw a line in the squad. You don't want this drip, drip, drip of they go off on tour and suddenly we find out he's not as injured as we thought. And suddenly somebody's agent is saying this. I mean, just fucking get it out there.
Well, isn't there another... I could be wrong about this, Paul, but isn't there the ancillary issue that, like, if you are trying to sell him and you're out there trying to get, I don't know, what do you get for a Koscielny? $7 million, $8 million, and then you announce the guy's getting docked wages, being forced to train with the reserves and is currently in breach of contract, like... if you're a club trying to buy him now, you're like, well, let's bid $2 million. Let's bid $1 million. I mean, he's made the situation untenable there. I mean, don't you shoot yourself in the foot a little bit?
I mean, it's getting pretty marginal at that point. Which is worse? I mean, they've taken a strong position. Look at who's the chap over at Lyon, Aulas. I mean, he's always telling his players they can shut the fuck up and they're sticking around for another season. We're not letting you out of your contract. And guess what they do? So it just...
I think it's one thing when you're doing that with up-and-coming 23-year-old, or 20-year-olds, and when you're doing it with a long-serving captain and 30-something-year-old, I think that's a little more difficult.
I think it's pretty marginal. I think the clubs who want to know what the price is, and they know where we're at. And how about we just let him sit for a couple of months? And if he really wants to fuck around, then we'll let him sit for a while, and then he can buy himself out, or he can piss off after 2 or 3 months in the middle of the season.
Well, I don't know what he's making, but presumably if he's in breach,
$90K apparently.
So what's $90K a week in annual money? Does anyone have that?
$4.5 million.
All right, so if he's in breach and you cancel the contract, $4.5 million is basically what you would have gotten in a transfer fee anyway. So, $5 million, $6 million. So maybe the reason they're doing this is they're going to take an aggressive approach to cancel his contract, let him go back to France that way on a free, but without having to pay him. I mean, well, if you just let him go back on a free, you don't have to pay him anyway. So what the fuck am I talking about?
That's not gonna work.
Never mind. Well, all right, look, Tim, let's parse some of this out a little bit in terms of who the enemies are here, who the villains are. So first of all, there is an Ornstein article out on the BBC website that does give a little more color to this. And again, we don't know where the details are coming from, whether they're coming from the players' camp or other players or agents or who it is. But apparently he was unhappy with how Unai Emery used him last season. There was a thought that going his playing schedule. There was a thought that getting back into the Champions League might fix things. He and Emery had a face-to-face meeting Wednesday. Koscielny communicated that he wouldn't be joining them. The Spaniard was furious. That's Emery. Obviously, Koscielny is not Spanish. Arsenal's head of football, Raul Senlehi, sent Koscielny a message expressing bitter disappointment and warning him that he would be in breach of contract if he doesn't travel. He's then going to be forced to train with the reserves, with the people left behind at London Colney. Which I think is the plot of the Leftovers spinoff show that's coming out. So that'll be interesting. So I don't know. It all looks like a mess. I guess, Tim, I do want to give you a shot to just quickly give me your thoughts on whether you think the statement they put out is the right tactic, and then we can get on to maybe parsing various villains of the piece here.
It's honestly, it's difficult to know. I'm one of those really weird people that likes to have all of the information.
Pointless. Absolutely pointless.
and some kind of evidence. My years working in investigation have like ruined my brain in this respect, because that's my principal frustration, right? I don't know, because obviously a whole load of stuff has happened to get to this point, and that's what I'm interested in, is how has it got to this point? How long has this been going on? Like, what is the detail? Like, this, it strikes me this doesn't just happen over a couple of days. This happens over a long period. And, there was some suggestion that Arsenal have triggered some kind of clause to extend his deal. We had that weird rumour, didn't we, last week that came out of nowhere that turned out not to be true, but that Nacho Monreal had terminated his contract.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you thought, oh, that's really odd. Where does that come from? Because don't get me wrong, quite a lot of stuff does get made up, but not usually that specific and, that easily disproved. So it's a bit weird.
Do you think it was that maybe like senior defender plans to cancel his contract kind of like got leaked and someone just took a guess and it was the wrong player? Or
maybe, but they've clearly triggered that with Nacho, and no kind of announcement has been made or anything like that. And you have to wonder if that's exactly what Nacho wanted. And Nacho's at a very similar stage of his career and might have very similar ambitions to go back to Spain for the last year or so. So. Whereas, and Arsenal, I think if Arsenal were in good shape, they would happily, grant both of those players and just say, yeah, absolutely, sure. You've been good servants. You're coming to your mid-30s. Absolutely. We'll just make sure the offer's right. We won't haggle massively. We'll just get a fee and we'll let you go. But we're in such a state at the moment that we have to hang on to them. And that could be causing the friction, really. But the statement, I don't really understand it, but that doesn't mean that it's a stupid thing to do, because there might be a really good reason behind it that I can't think of, but I don't know what it is. Like I say, I can only imagine, look, he wouldn't have been on the plane, he wouldn't have been on the tour, and if they're not prepared to lie and say he's injured because they want to sell him, then I maybe they don't really have a choice. But I don't.
Tim, do you have any idea what he means by he doesn't like how he was used last year? I mean, of all the players,
I can tell you what it means. It means he had to go play dead rubbers away in the Europa League after coming back from an Achilles. He probably felt that he was overused or used in games where he wasn't needed. I mean, one thing that the article from Ornstein calls out is that Koscielny was looking at extending his contract based on Champions League qualification. He probably has a disdain for the Europa League, like any normal sentient human being should. That's the appropriate response to the Europa League. And didn't want to be in it, didn't want to be playing in it, wanted to protect his longevity. Tim, thoughts?
Well, it's not quite accurate.
I mean, it's 100% accurate because I said it. But all right, Clive, before I come to you just real quick, I mean, Tim, I think there's plenty of blame to go to Koscielny here. That you are club captain, you're a longtime servant of the club. I get that you're disappointed that you have to stay and you don't want to, and maybe there would be a way out. But in the meantime, you have to fulfill your professional duties, get on the plane, go on tour, act like a grown-up, and negotiate a better outcome. Now, maybe he felt this was the only approach he could take to get the outcome he wants. And if so, it's going to burn his relationship with the fans of a club that was supposed to mean something to him, but so be it. I guess the question is, on the club side, are you prepared to point a finger at anyone, at Raul, at Emery? Is there anyone on the club side that you feel has to be challenged in terms of this situation developing this way? That was over to you, Tim. Sorry, just real quick before we go over to Clive. Tim Stillman left the call is what I'm seeing. So as Tim's internet joins, I like this. Our 300th episode, shades of some of the earlier episodes. I like that. Technical glitches, some sound issues, no problem whatsoever. Clive, how about you answer that? Yeah.
Can I add a point on it?
I'd prefer you didn't, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to quickly say, if I'm going to blame somebody, we, and that's Raul and his team, have been very slow at resolving situations. We just kind of let it hang out there, and I think Clive touched on it. This feels like it has a bit of the Ramses about it, although there's a lot that's different. Something's the same, which is players not really knowing where they stand going forward. On the other hand, we've been very fair to Koscielny in other ways. He kept the captain's band. He was always treated very respectfully by Emery, and we stuck with him in terms of supporting him while injured and keeping his place ready for him when he came back. And he got loads of play time. I mean, on the footballing side, I'm sorry if there was a game or two he wanted to be rested for, but I would think with an Achilles problem, he would have no problem not playing in any game he said he didn't want to play in. So I'm not even buying that side of it. But I do think we're just such a mess in terms of players' situations and understanding where they're going to be in terms of the club in upcoming seasons. We leave this stuff hanging out there, and I could see why that side of it would trouble him and why he might want a more settled future.
All right, I mean, look, Ornstein says this, and it can only have come from one place, in my opinion. The 33-year-old is understood to have become increasingly discontent since his return in December, primarily over the management of his playing schedule. Clive, explain to me why my clearly correct answer that has laced within it criticism of Emery because of my confirmation bias is in any way possibly incorrect.
No, so this is where I think Koscielny's using words cleverly, right? So let's think about this. He was due to come back around Christmas time. What happened? Rob Holding got injured, remember? December? I think
doesn't ring a bell. Rob Holding got injured?
Yeah. I
just assumed all our best players were playing because the defense was rock solid.
And I think around December time, we also had a situation where we had lost Socrates for suspension. And maybe even Mustafi at the same time, I'm not too sure. But I think Koscielny was rushed back slightly. Right? So, and in those early games, he was not great, remember? He was not great. And then he eventually found his form and he eventually turned in his normal hero performances until late in the season where I think he hit a bit of a wall. And that sometimes happens. You can keep it going for a while, then you hit a wall, then the fact you've not had a proper pre-season, for example, it catches up with you. And he hit a wall and towards the end of the season, he was walking dead. I think he was thinking, if we get to Champions League, I'll stay. But we didn't get there. And I think this is a byproduct of the Europa League. If we got to Champions League, no doubt we'd had more money. No doubt we'd have bought 2 centre-halves. But now we're having to redress the situation. We're buying a young kid from St Etienne and we're loaning him back. It doesn't mean that our other centre-halves that we want to keep can knock the door of the club and say, I want a free transfer. It's just business. It's just where we are. I wouldn't look too deep into this. I just think, if you look at the fundamentals of it, the club captain has decided not to go on a tour. That's quite big, right? That's quite big. But in Europe, for example, they don't put a big deal on the captains. The captain, so what? This is a professional player that's not doing his job. So Arsenal will sort it out. I don't think it's a tactic. I think there were discussions at the end of the season that were deemed to be quite positive. But that's why this has been a surprise. And if you're doing a tour, trust me, Elliot, if you're doing a tour like this, every detail would have been confirmed. Playing time would have been confirmed. Koscielny's role within that tour as the club captain, right? Can you imagine all the PR stuff that's going on out there? Can you imagine what's happening in America? It's the really important stuff with sponsors, for example. And the club captain has decided to just not go. Whatever his situation is, that's not great. That's not great for the club.
There's no way he told them 2 weeks ago, I'm not going.
No, exactly. This is a shock thing. So they've reacted with a curse statement. But you're going to be out there in America, mate, and you're going to be seeing all the things that are happening outside of the games that promote this club in that side of the world.
Yeah, and the captain won't be part of any of that.
The captain won't be part of it. Let's not talk about... This is bigger than Emery, man. Emery's a coach.
Can I ask you a question just real quick, Clive? Do you think that maybe this is actually a sign of Koscielny's dedication to the club and his commitment to the club, in that, just hear me out, that when you look at Fabregas as captain, Van Persie as captain, Gallas as captain. I mean, maybe he's trying to carry on the tradition of captains being huge pricks with no loyalty to Arsenal. I mean, that's real commitment.
You know what? It's really simple.
Nothing, not even crickets.
It's really,
fine. Fuck
it's really
you guys.
Simple. Right? I'm going to say something that's going to resonate with people who have jobs and have worked places a long time.
Yeah, not me.
Well, when you work somewhere a long time and you work with a boss for 9-10 years, and then that boss goes, it makes you think about yourself. It makes you think about how you operate, how you work, your position in the club. And this is why I think Emery did a very smart thing. There are other people just not seeing it. He did a very smart thing by doing the 5 captains, because that settles people down. Because then people think, okay, this guy's got some sort of affinity with me, right? So what the 5 captains things did, that allows you to get to know your club really quickly by having a leadership group. That's all it is. It's a leadership group. It allows you to permeate the squad, find out what's happening, give certain people responsibility, and share the responsibility and create leadership layers within the squad. That's all this is. People are taking that too literal. And so, it's just really, it's just the fact that the old boss is gone, and he wondered about himself. And you can't think of more of a Wengerite player than Koscielny or maybe Theo Walcott. He's been there the entire Emirates, almost the entire Emirates era, and the big man's gone. I'm in the autumn of my career. I've got a young family. Maybe I should think about where I want to play the last few years of my life. But he signed a contract with an option, and that option can be triggered by the club at any time. And that's what he signed. And the club have triggered it. No doubt they may not have done if they got to a Champions League. And this is where we are. Now, it's business, it's football, it's life. It's a bit of a shame, because I'm not sure that, of all somebody to ruffle his feathers, I wouldn't have picked him. Because I like the guy, right? He's been an absolute stalwart. And many of those Champions Leagues that we got in 17 years on the trot, we wouldn't have got there without him. That's for sure. Right? So he has been a loyal servant. But your job title is called professional football, and what he has done today is not professional. No,
and the only thing I think that's an issue here now, Tim, that we have to talk about is the practicality, the impact of this. I mean, whether it's absurd or not, Laurent Koscielny is the best central defender at Arsenal still. He is a player who did play a lot down the stretch. Surely would have played a lot this season to the extent that he could. I'm not saying that that's a good plan, but, it looks, we'll get on to Saliba and we'll get on to some of the youth players leaving and staying in the tour, and we'll cover some of that. But it leaves us in a position now where it looks like now Mustafi has to stay. We can't get rid of him anyway. Holding's not back yet. I mean, although he's on the horizon, fine. Socrates probably wasn't quite as good as people would like to suggest. And now Koscielny, I don't see a way back here. I certainly don't see this ending with Koscielny playing for Arsenal this season, although it could. So for you, what are the practical implications of this move?
Well, they're difficult for the reasons you describe. Although Koscielny taking this action is a bit of a shock, the fact that he wants to leave isn't. And like I said, he said that last summer that if he hadn't been injured, that he'd probably gone then. So that's not a surprise. So in that respect, it probably doesn't change very much. I'd imagine Arsenal have known for quite a long time. It does leave us in a pickle. But one way or another, there was just no way we were going to be able to rely on Koscielny for that many games next season, whether he's here or not. We have to find a way somehow of weaning ourselves off of that dependence from him, whether he's here or not. So I'd imagine that they're going to put a lot of faith in Rob Holding when he comes back. Maybe Callum Chambers as well. I tell you what, if Callum Chambers wants to piss off on loan again this summer, then I don't know what's wrong with him, because I was already really disappointed that last summer he didn't look at Arsenal's defence and think, I can get in there. because Rob Holding did, and he didn't have to do that much to become a first-choice defender at Arsenal. So if Callum Chambers is not licking his lips at this scenario, then we really need to throw him in the biggest dustbin we can find, because he might get some opportunities. And I quite like Callum Chambers. I think he's quite good. I don't think he's a superstar, but I don't think Arsenal are in superstar territory at the moment. I think the question we ask ourselves is he better than Mustafi?
Yeah, he's probably not Arsenal caliber, and yet would be our second or third best central defender. Is the best way you can say.
Yeah, exactly. That's just, I've been writing about a lot of this over the last few weeks, kind of saying, like, should we lean into Guendouzi as a first choice? Should we lean into, looking at Iwobi in central midfield? I'm not saying any of these are ideal, but my feeling for a long time is Arsenal are going to have to get better with what they've already got, because we haven't got any money and nobody wants to buy the players that we don't want. And that's not a good equation. So for me, there was always this summer a big sense of trying to get a little bit more, just trying to squeeze a little bit more out of what we've already got, and trying to cultivate potential. And potential doesn't just mean academy players. Potential can mean 24-year-old Rob Holding. It can mean 24-year-old Callum Chambers. It can mean 23-year-old Alex Iwobi. It can mean Matteo Guendouzi. If we can make those guys a bit better, then we're not looking at making up an enormous gap to the top four here. We're looking at the moment, a 1 point gap. And if we can squeeze a little bit more out of some of those guys, it might be enough. But with Koscielny, yes, it complicates things in terms of our defence. But for me, that's not the surprise. The surprise is the conduct, how sour it is, how much of a political and image problem that causes us. The problems on the playing side, I think, were there anyway. So in a sense, I don't think anything's changed.
Yeah, it just makes a complex situation worse. And I think it gives rise to the question, Paul, of how this plays in the dressing room. I remember we did a podcast back in, I want to say it was January. They all blend together for me into a blur of things that I pay no attention to while I'm surfing Twitter. But the issue here is, in the January podcast, we talked about Ozil and the power play that Emery was having with Ozil, and the conjecture about is he going to win this power play, and he's not playing Ozil and he's not playing Ramsey, and how will this play in the dressing room? And I think we agreed that, like, if it works and the team wins, then you win and you succeed. But if it fails and the team doesn't win, then it can backfire on the coach. And sure enough, Ramsey and Ozil were brought back into the squad. And I think Tim has actually been pretty vocal on the podcast. And Tim, apologize if I put words in your mouth here, but I'm about to stuff them right in your mouth, in saying that, there was almost a disappointment when he went, or Paul, maybe it was you, almost a disappointment going back to Ozil and Ramsey because he had stepped back from the line that he had drawn in the sand. The reason that was all right. So I put it in the mouth of everyone except the man who said it.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay. So there you go. But here's my long rambling point that I've been trying to get to and not quite getting there. The issue with Koscielny may be a shortcoming of Koscielny. We may see it that way. All of us fans, all of us people who follow the club may feel that Koscielny is in the wrong here. But that may not be how it plays in the dressing room. There will be disappointment that they didn't qualify for the Champions League. There will be people who are friendly with Koscielny, who see him as an elder statesman. He is the captain of the club, who will feel he's being done dirty here, think that the club is doing him wrong, who will feel that the club isn't taking care of its own, who will look at situations like that and have less confidence in the club and maybe the manager, maybe people like Raul. So how worried would you be about the players going on tour, especially maybe some of the older players who have seen a lot in the game and maybe believe in player power a little more, like Aubameyang, like Lacazette, like Mkhitaryan, like Ozil, obviously, who already has quite a clear agenda, I think we would say. How worried are you that this is yet another possible trigger for a toxic atmosphere in the dressing room and potentially turning players against management and the coach?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I wouldn't say Koscielny is super close necessarily with the rest of the squad now. I mean, there's been so much. The good news is there's been so much turnover. There'll be relationships, and obviously a couple of our more senior players are French or of French origins in terms of their
well,
league.
He's the
and their
captain.
experience.
He's older. I mean, he will have been a player that's looked up to, at least.
Yeah. But he's not. He's also been kind of in and out of late.
That's fair.
And there has been a lot of turnover. I think it's one of those things. If they can get the mess cleaned up quick, players move on. They're pretty sanguine about stuff, about contracts, etc., and so they'll have their sympathies for Koscielny because that could be them one of these years. I mean, Aubameyang kind of did something similar at Dortmund, but I still think they're not going to get overly emotional about it. And if we tidy the mess, the thing will be not letting it just bleed and bleed. So they need to take a clear position from the club standpoint, and the players need to see that the club has backbone about it, whatever they decide to do, even if that's having him play with the under-23s for a month or two before bringing them back into the fold. Whatever the position is, it needs to be. And obviously, if we can clear the mess up quickly and get him sold and get a decent fee, great. If not, they got to take a firm line. And the fact that he's a captain cuts both ways. And in this case, I think they've got to be particularly firm with him. It's a bit of a letdown. It's insulting to the manager and insulting to our CEO or whatever Raul's called these days. And it's not just another player. So they got to do what they got to do.
Are you? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask, are you surprised that Emery then is taking the position that he's not interested in someone like Christian Bielik? I mean, Tim talked about, Chambers could have made a difference last season and surely could this season. Look, I get that League One isn't the Premier League, but French Ligue 2 is not the Premier League, and Guendouzi at 19 years old was able to make the leap. Now, look, not every player can make that leap, but he's impressed everywhere he's been. He's got a big body. He impressed over the summer for his country. Given the circumstance, why don't you think he's been brought on tour? And why don't you think Emery wants to have a look at a player that has impressed basically everywhere he's been in his Arsenal career?
Yeah, well, look, I'm frustrated he's not going on tour. Obviously, part of it is he was going late in his tournament.
And now we want him to sign and loan him out instead of selling him. I mean, that's not how you get a player to do what you want him to do, is it?
No, it is a bit Chelsea, though. I mean, they've 31 of those buggers floating around the place or whatever they've got at the moment.
Yeah, but all right. So this is sort of my point. And, this gets back to Clive. You've talked about the Arsenal tax and people don't want to buy Arsenal players, but you contribute to your own problems. What I mean by that is you want to sell players, bring them in your first team. Christian Bielik, having played a season in League One, is worth X million. Christian Bielik making a few Europa League appearances and playing in the League Cup for Arsenal is worth 2X million, even if he's not fantastic. I think it enhances their reputation, but also if you want to sign him and loan him, bring him on tour and let him at least participate in club activities. I mean, okay. Clive, can you explain to me why we're not doing that?
I will explain.
I would love an explanation. Right. Please help me.
So
Somebody help me.
Christian Bielik, I quite like the player. He looks really nice. He's got some lovely sways. He moves to the midfield. He lacks a bit of fitness late in games, but he's got wonderful technique for a guy so big. And I really like the fact he went down to League One and did what he did. Right now, in my opinion, he's a championship player. That's what he is. If he plays in centre midfield for Arsenal, I'll be honest with you, I'm not a fan of his, but Callum Chambers would be a better option in centre midfield than Christian Bielik. He's done it in the Premiership for Fulham, and he ended up being their player of the year. Callum Chambers is not a centre half in the Premiership because he has no last man defensive gene. He hasn't got the way of tackling with the level of desperation and solidity you need to be the last man of your defence. That's why I think he makes a fantastic holding midfielder where he's got great technique and he can move the ball, but he can tackle, he can head, he can block spaces, and he goes to receive it nicely. So if you're Arsenal, you loan out Bielik and you get him to sign a contract. Not like he did with Serge Gnabry, where we loaned him out, went to Olympics, come back 1 year ago, he's in charge, see you later, £5 million, £50 million player sitting in Bayern Munich's first team and one of the stars of the German national team. So you tie him down and you control the asset. And we have to do this more. I want to see us use the loan market.
What if he won't sign, though? What if you're just not offering him anything attractive enough? All right.
And you have to sell. But that's okay. That's okay. What we can't have, Elliot, what we can't have, I need you to, this is really important. We're trying to control things now. What we can't have any longer is what Alexis did, what Aaron Ramsey did.
Of course, I agree with that, right? I don't have any disagreement.
But we have to say, this is how we operate. And Raul said this. There'll be a new discipline in place. This is how we operate. When it gets to 2 years, you will be sold. It's as simple as that. There will be a lot more contracts now, 3+1s, 3 years plus a 1 year option. You get to the last year, third year, and you say, you got 1 year to go. Are you going to sign again? No. Okay, we'll take out the option. 2 years, we're going to sell you. You see what I mean?
But can I ask you a question? Can I just ask you push back on this for 1 second? Let me just ask you a question. So let's say you look at our situation right now, and I think it doesn't take a genius to see that there's room for another central defender in our team. Now you might say, no, there's not, because there's Socrates and Koscielny. Well, there's not Koscielny, but maybe Koscielny and Socrates. All right, just hear me out. Just hear me out. Okay, so you look at Bielik and you say, realistically, what are we getting for this guy now? $5 million, $6 million? Why wouldn't you say to him, we'll give you first team football this season. We'll play you in the Europa League group stage. We'll play you in the League Cup. We'll bring you on tour. We'll look for opportunities to integrate you in the first team. If you sign with us, you sign him, you give him some first team chances. And at a minimum, if he's not a fit, you probably, just by virtue of that, have a £12 million asset next season instead of a £5 million asset this. And if you get lucky, he helps you at a position where you need it anyway. Why cut bait cheap right now?
Yeah, so let's tell you the mind of a football, right? Basically, this kid played lots of youth football. I think it's his second loan now, but this last loan has gone really, really well. He now knows he's a first team player. No messing. I now need to be in a first team squad, and I want to play. Arsenal can't guarantee him that, and nobody listening is going to say, well, we would agree with that. We can't guarantee he's going to play first team football. We just can't, right? And so what Arsenal wants to do is maybe build the asset a little bit more, either for selling or to make sure that actually he has done this now at the Championship level or a lower Premiership level. We can now integrate him into our squad. It's what Chelsea do all the time. They do it all the time. Now, we don't know the conversations that have happened, but I understand the logic. Like I said, I quite like the player. I would like to see him in America and see what he's got so we can all make an assessment, right? So
why wouldn't Emery want him on tour? I guess that's my question.
Hold on a second.
Yeah,
he's laid back from the tournament.
Yeah, Guendouzi's not on tour neither, is he? Is that right? Yeah, so he's not said he's not going on tour. We don't know if they've even spoken. They might have spoken at some point in last season. We can't take the snippets and use it. He is not on tour. He is not back on duty yet. And it'll be interesting to see what happens when he does come back on duty, because I do think there's a player in there. But I understand if Arsenal want to loan him again and control the asset. It's a way of building. I'd like to see us do it more. What Chelsea do is they absolutely pay over the odds for really young players, and some of this in an immoral way. They park them and they stack them. They win all the youth tournaments, and they loan them. And they have made tens and tens and tens of millions selling these players or loaning them out and making a profit on them. And ones and twos have made it in. And really is ones and twos. It's a bit of a people factory. But right now, if you think about Nathan Ake, 20 million, how much did Solanke go for? Liverpool Stolen's about 8 or 9. That's just two off the top of my head. You got to do it. They just sold Jadon Silva to Bristol City. I'm not sure what number. It was about 10 million.
But we're not enhancing the value of our players, so we're not getting those. We're not getting those
because
fees.
We're not loaning them out. Because we haven't gone down that pathway yet. We've loaned out 6 or 7 compared to 47. So I'd like to see us do more of it. I'll tell you now, these young players don't want to know about under 21 and under 23 football. They all want to play first team. There's a bit of a in academies right now. There's a bit of a kickback to signing contracts. They all want to leave. They don't want to be there past 18. Under 23 football is dying. I have a friend of mine out right now, trialling at Reading, under 18s. 18-year-old kid, under 23 football. He's killing the trial. He's got a chance of playing non-league football, first team, or staying at Reading. And anybody in their brain says, "Stay at Reading. You're at a pro club." He can get more money playing for non-league, and he's playing first team football. And all the kids in the academies, they want to leave. And he said to me, he goes, when Reading play Manchester United, for example, the kids don't want to play. But when they're playing Cheltenham, a non-league game, and it's a real game against men, everyone wants to play in that game. I thought that was really interesting. And it's the dynamic of the young player is changing. Their intelligence says, I want to play. That's why German scouts are over here. That's why Dutch scouts
they want to put themselves in a shop window because they know their career is short, and by 19 they want to be earning money.
There's going to be a lot more players leaving our academy to go and play at 18 because they can't see a pathway to the first team. So the only way a club can respond is by controlling them via the contract. And that's what they're trying to do. And it looks a bit ugly and lumpy because if he gets into the press, but they've got to try to do that. When they've invested in an asset, they've got to try to get a return in one way or another.
I know you're disappointed Amichi's leaving. So,
well, it's life. And he's a great example. Hudson-Odoi was going to Bayern Munich. He does his Achilles. Bayern Munich are looking at him, looking at Amici. He turned his head. He doesn't want to sign. He wants to play first-team football, and his head is not in the game at the moment, I'm afraid, and that's the way it goes.
All right, well, Tim, let me ask you this then. I mean, is some of what's happening... Look, the zeitgeist right now around Arsenal is that it is a dumpster fire. Everything's bad. Woe is the club. Can't get anything right. And if you take a step back, I think Clive has a point, which is this is the growing pains of trying to institute new processes, new protocols about how things are run. But
internal
processes. Boom.
Here's gurgling.
Paul, vindicated. If you don't know what we're talking about, it's probably for the best. Hey, so Tim, I mean, I wonder also, though, if some of this is what happens when a club that spent 20 years in the Champions League becomes a Europa League club. That suddenly you have players on bigger money than Europa League clubs can sign for, players of a certain stature who feel they should be at Champions League clubs, youth players who no longer feel that they're at a club with the trajectory they want. Their reputation is suffering because now they're not getting into the first team at a Europa League club instead of a Champions League club. The opportunities are changing. How much of what's happening at Arsenal right now do you think is a worrying sign of the fallout from a change in pedigree and stature of the club itself?
Oh yeah, hugely, and it was always going to be like that. I think during the stadium debt years, shall we say, and I recognise just as a caveat that we are still in stadium debt, but hopefully people know what I mean when I say the stadium debt years.
Everyone knows. Yep. Mm-hmm.
But I think the club always said, "Oh, we can spend like a season or two outside," and I think at the moment the case was always, we can do 1 year outside the Champions League comfortably. 2, we can do that, but nobody said 3. Nobody said that we can do 3, and there's a good reason they haven't said that, because that does change everything. Because like accounts what are released basically almost a year after the fact, that there's no covering any ills when you've been outside for 3 years. You can just about do it in 2, but not in 3. And that is when, you're not kind of, you lose the ability to spend, to kind of project, you lose the ability to say, all right, we've put 50 million down on Aubameyang and we can't really afford that at the moment. But if he gets us back in, you're chasing your losses. You spend 3 years outside, you're not chasing your losses anymore. They're just losses and you can't keep chasing them. It's the same principle as, if you're a gambler and you lose your stake. You keep a bit of stake money there. You keep going into your stake money, but when it's not there anymore, it's not there, and you can't take any gambles. You can't place any bets, and you're done. And that's kind of where we are. And I think it was reasonably obvious that was always going to happen. And I think the club were not open, I'd say, but I think it's always been reasonably obvious that a third year would be very, very damaging to us. And yeah, absolutely. We've got players who are growing old on our books on massive wages that we can't shift and we can't afford. Players who've probably become demotivated on those wages by quote unquote the Arsenal project. And the irony, I guess, given the conversation you and Clive just had, is that we're in a stage where we have to rely on kind of our own talent, but our own talent doesn't want to be here that much. And you've got even someone like Tyrese John-Jules, who I look at and think you've got a really good chance of staking a claim in the next year to 18 months, because Danny Welbeck's gone. Doesn't look like we're getting anyone to replace him. So there's a spot there. And, Emery doesn't seem to fully trust Nketiah. There's a spot open there. But, you know, Tyrese John Jules, understandably, is playing it cool and saying, well, okay, yeah, maybe I've got a chance here, but maybe I get a chance somewhere else. And yeah, absolutely, this is the difficulty of losing status, and most importantly, of losing money. And that's why I've never, ever thought at any point this summer that you'll see some big overhaul, because nobody's going to come and pay for Mustafi. No one's taking Ozil off us. No one's taking Mkhitaryan off us. And until those guys are off our books, we're kind of stuck. And it's really as simple as that. So what we really need now, and this for me is where Emery can really, really earn his money. We need a coach, because we need someone who can get more out of what we've got, because we're not going to get a lot more from the transfer market. That's just the reality. We're not going to get Wilfried Zaha. That's not going to happen. You know, Palace aren't going to take Mustafi, Chambers, Elneny, like we think we're just going to like dump all our rubbish like in Croydon for them. Like they're not going to take that.
What if we bring them a bunch of aluminum cans and they give us the money back for the aluminum? And
do you know who might have been a really good make-weight that might have made them sit up and take notice for Wilfried Zaha? Danny Welbeck. That might have got them thinking. Them thinking, okay, they were going to buy
him. They were going to buy him actually, and they still might. They were interested in him in January, and they still might. So he was on track for a free transfer to them. Exactly. But the other player they're looking at is actually Reece Nelson. So
and we can't spare him.
I'd rather have Nelson than Zaha. I mean, let's be honest. It's a future that might be worth something, you know.
And it's just, you know, keeping hold of someone like Danny Welbeck, like a valuable asset like that, we might have made them think about Wilfried Zaha. They're not gonna take a couple of centre backs and a shit central midfielder, are they, for Wilfried Zaha? That's just fantasy land. So
this analogy will mean nothing to you, and probably only to my American comrades here, but I play fantasy NFL from time to time. And there's this thing that some asshole will always do in every league where he takes like 5 players that he doesn't use. You know what I mean? Like his bench players, and offers you like 5 players he has no use for your star. You know what I mean? And like those are the trades that you always call your friend up and you're like, oh, you see what John did? What a fucking dick. Of course I'm not taking that trade. And like, that's what we're going to do with Palace. It just doesn't make any sense.
Do you know, it reminds me of like, you know, in my kind of corporate career at like former organizations, I used to work in like kind of human resources, and when you know, when people had like underperforming staff, and instead of like performance managing them or sacking them, you know, whenever like there was a team who said, oh, we could really do with an administrator, this other team would go, oh, I can offer you someone. And it's like no, because I know that person's underperforming. Fucking manage them properly.
Tim,
don't try and do this. So it feels like that.
Even the HR department at an accountancy firm wouldn't want Carl Jenkins in there. You're not fooling anybody with that. Look, let's start to move on if that's okay with you, because just we just got a couple odds and ends to fill in, and then actually Scott's going to join with some statistics that put into context where we are at the end of last season, or where we were and where we're headed. And I want to get Paul back in here for reasons that I can't fully articulate. Paul, let's just quickly talk William Saliba, if that's okay with you. Look, I think this player is extremely highly regarded from what I've read. He's exactly the kind of player Arsenal should be bringing in. Someone who's, before he's a superstar, could develop into that on our books, solve a problem position for us, and then potentially be worth a fortune if we can't hold on to him. But we've got to loan him back to make that happen, it would seem. Some people are just irate about this. What good is signing a center back we can't use this season? Where do you come down on the idea of us buying exactly what we need only to not use it this season?
We didn't really have an option. This was the only option available.
Right, but there are some people that would say, then don't go get him. Go get someone you can use this season. I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, we'll care next season. And he's not, from what I understand, he's not really costing us that much this season. So the real crime is, why have we not found a centre-back? Not why are we loaning Saliba back? That was a black box situation. That was binary. Do you want him next season or don't you? Yes, we want him next season. Now back to this season. Where are our centre backs? We're struggling to hold on to the ones we got or sell the ones we have. There isn't remotely a rumble of anybody coming in. I don't think there's too much to say about the Saliba thing apart from that might be the one clever thing we've done this summer. And if we're all fixed in a year's time and we got our shit together, I'd probably take that deal right now. I'd take one more bad year if we got our shit together next summer. And Tim's talked a lot about Emery being a transition manager, that you just have to go through an Emery or two. It's maybe not your Moyes, but it's a guy you're going to struggle with, and it's a bit of a shit show all round. And in the end, you're just kind of grinding through the players and doing a squad turnover and getting your internal processes sorted. And he's the guy, yeah, and he's the guy who, to some degree, pays the price. I didn't like that when Tim said it, and then he kept saying it time and time again. But unfortunately, whether it was by plan or just inevitability, it's feeling like Emery's time with us, be it another, if he makes another season, I still think there's some chance he'll make another 2 seasons, but it'll probably all be just grinding through the players we have and turning over the squad. I mean, there are opportunities here if we were good enough to advance our youths, for the young guys to come through, to take some tough decisions, to get all these players who are on 100k plus off our books when they should be paid something like 50, 60, 70k. We're going to turn over a lot of players one way or another. And as I think Tim said, what we really need is a coach who can really coach and develop players. And Emery, somewhat understandably in my books, his job was to get us into the Champions League last year, and he failed. But maybe he can coach, and maybe those are the marching orders, and maybe that's what Freddie, being part of the coaching staff, is, to make sure we have a pipeline. And maybe the fact that we're maybe not that interested in Bielik is because actually those minutes you want to give to Bielik, Freddie wants to give to whoever, Willock,
Macy,
Saka, etc. So, I mean, it could be just a continued shit show, but maybe there's a plan. And
if he's giving Bielik's minutes to Saka, then we've got a real fucking problem.
Sure. But you know what I mean? There are youth players, and if you look at who's made the happy noises in the media, it wasn't Bielik. He made it clear he doesn't feel he's part of our thinking. Whereas if you look at Willock, Nketiah, Reece Nelson, Smith Rowe, they've all made very, very positive noises, and they were all part of the in-club last year, although the season transpired in different ways. So, if we get a couple of good players out of those guys and a couple of good sales, loans and then sales out of those guys, that's pretty good compared to previous years. Yeah. And it's kind of what our game is. We need a coach, rather than what Emery was for us last year, to develop players and bring them through. And, maybe Zach Medley, maybe we talk like we don't have Mavropanos anymore. And I know he disappointed towards the end of the last season, but you got him, you got Holding. We got Chambers, who I don't feel has, he doesn't seem to me to be in our long-term plans. I think we all get that vibe. But we could come out of it with 2 very, very good centre-backs if we coach them to a level they should be at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, I have to say I'm hugely in favor of the Saliba deal. I mean, if we believe this guy's a future star at center back, go get him. And if the only way you can go get him is to loan him back, I mean, the one thing you want by having a director of football, by having people that, by having a coach instead of a manager, is that someone can say, look, we're going to look out for the long-term interests of the club and the short-term interest. You can do both. And you could make an argument that bringing young Saliba into Arsenal right now isn't any good for him anyway. He's developing really well where he is, so leave him there. Let him get one more year of that trajectory of his development, and then bring him in when he's ready, and hopefully we're in a better position. But yeah, I mean, you can do both. You can guard the short-term interests of the club and the long-term interests, and I get that it's frustrating because we need a center back. We sign one, and we're not even going to use him, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't just sign another one. I mean, Clive, how do you feel about the Saliba deal? Does it sit well with you?
Yeah. Hey, look, we sat here. Remember that period when Liverpool bought your mate Naby Keita, and we went, oh my God, how have they got him a year in advance? Mm-hmm. Did they need him? They got by without him. And he came in and he started really well and then dropped away. But we all agreed that's a smart move. Get him early because he was building and building and building. They nabbed him at a price and tucked him away.
Chelsea did it with Pulisic, by the way, too. I mean, maybe not the same caliber of player, but yeah.
And you have to. You got to nail these things down. So that's outsmarting the market, right? So if the guy turns out to be the new Varane, then we're going to sit back and say that was a genius move. The problem is, I remember Tim came up with a line, I think we stole it from somewhere, the 3-star hotel line. I reckon we got a couple of 2-star hotels now, haven't we, in centre halves, and that's
we've got a bunch of hostels, let's be honest.
Yeah, we've got a real problem. Monreal is on his last legs. Koscielny has literally got one leg. Socrates is an interesting player. I like him. He should be first pick, but he can't play every minute of every game because the way he's tackled, that's not going to happen. Holding, people are looking at Holding like the second coming, and I'm telling you, it's going to take a while for him to get back up to speed. It really is. This is not a twisted ankle he's got. This is a cruciate.
His dating game is on point, though. He's having a good time. Having a good time in America with his American girlfriend.
And it's 9 months out, right? So that's 2-3 months before we get back to anything like what he was. And the same for Bellerin as well, by the way. So we've got to be really careful there. You've got to manage those players. Mavropanos is scared of his own shadow, which is a bit of a shame. And so we've got to do some work. And so I know Tim he's poured water all over my thoughts of about 15 players coming in, and I do sort of understand what he's saying, but I am still hopeful there'll be 3 or 4 players coming in to change the dynamic of this team. And obviously a left back, a centre midfielder, and a wide forward for sure, and a centre half. If we can't get that 4, then we are really having to look. We're going to have to look a lot further back in our thoughts about how we got here, because this would be a situation where all of your numbers you keep quoting at me, Elliot, about us being a mid-table team, if we don't get those 4 players, that will be reality next year. I guarantee it, because these players are, a lot of these players are not going to improve, and the ones that did really well last year are going to have to do very well to sustain that. And then we are looking at some of the younger players as the players that are going to reach a higher ceiling, and there is no sure thing in that. What we need is a Gareth Bale syndrome, where you get a bolter out of nowhere, somebody that was barely playing left back. Every time he played, they lost. Suddenly, he has a massive game and turns into something amazing. And that's what we need. We need something to happen, like a Cesc Fabregas, just come out of the club and go, bang, I'm here and I'm reaching the top level. We need a couple of those to happen, and to shorten the pathway to what we think is going to happen in the next couple of years.
Yeah, well said. Tim, as we say goodbye here, I just want to get your thoughts on one thing really quickly. So Edu has been officially announced, and the obvious has happened. We are linked with everybody who has ever been to Brazil, let alone plays in Brazil. Just quickly, you did a phenomenal Patreon pod on Edu, and we'll expand more on that in the regular pod when we have more time down the road. I don't want to stretch this out to be a 4-hour podcast, but as much as I'm sure the listener would enjoy that. Just really quickly, your thoughts on Edu, and maybe you can touch on Martinelli, where he comes from, what that means in terms of Brazilian football, whether it's realistic to expect to see him anytime soon in the first team.
Yeah, sure. So with Edu, the important thing is he's done this type of job before, and a big part of his role for Brazil that I think will be interesting for Arsenal was ensuring a style and a philosophy through all of the age groups right up to the first team. The other interesting thing potentially about Edu's role was that a big part of his role as well is that, millions and millions and millions of Brazilians have dual nationality. Lots of them hold 2 passports. It's a melting pot of a country in that respect. And Brazil started losing players to other countries. You had Diego Costa going for Spain, Jorginho going for Italy, Thiago Alcantara went for Spain. Lots of players started to turn Brazil down, and a lot of it was because they didn't feel that love and that contact from the Brazilian national team. And when they became good, a lot of those players were kind of late bloomers, and when they became good, And they had a couple of offers. They kind of thought, well, you know what, Brazil showed no interest in me when I was a teenager, so I'm declaring somewhere else. And a lot of them move to other countries when they're 18, 19. They feel connections with other nationalities. And a big part of his job was to stop that rot, to stop that happening, and to have early contact with young Brazilian players, convince them there's a pathway for them, and make them feel that love and that connection. And if Arsenal are in a phase of kind of Project Youth Mark II, then that's potentially quite interesting. As for Martinelli, I've never seen him play because he's barely played at any sort of level. He played in the Campeonato Paulista for a 4th division side, but he did, by all accounts, play very, very well against the big teams. The way he came up was that he took part in a tournament that happens every January in Brazil called the Copinha, which is an under-20 tournament. And it's a huge, huge deal in Brazil because it happens in the only time of year that there is no Brazilian domestic football. The Brazilian domestic calendar runs for 11 months. The players have 4 weeks off, and that's it. And they host this, because of the state championships. So they host the Copinha in New Year, and it's huge because lots of young Brazilian players make it. And go into first teams, so fans are very interested and engaged in the youth teams, and secondly, it just happens when there's no other football on. The Copinha is held in Sao Paulo every year, and it is the premier youth tournament at club level in South America, and every single club in every top division in the world will have scouts there. It's a massive meat market for scouts, and every decent player that has come out of Sao Paulo has played in the Copinha and come to the attention of scouts through that route. It happened with Gabriel, who used to play for us. That's exactly how he got his
We
first
always find the
professional
best defenders.
That's how he came to the attention of Vitória in Brazil. He was playing at no level. He had a good tournament in the Copinha, picked up by a scout. That's it. You're away if you have a good tournament. That's what Martinelli did. Martinelli was one of the standout players at the Copinha. He was at Ituano, and so Ituano saw an opportunity and they thought, right, he's on people's radar now. And he'd been on people's radar before. There's Bayern Munich had looked at him, Manchester United had looked at him. They all knew he had an Italian passport, but he had a breakout Copinha, and so Ituano were like, right, we're going to play him in the state championships against the big boys, and if he has 3 or 4 good games, we'll sell him on for good money, which is exactly what happened. He played well against Corinthians, he played well against Sao Paulo. End of story. They were able to sell him on. So it's a gamble because he hasn't played at any sort of level yet. But a bit like the Saliba signing, people don't like, the idea of loaning back, and people don't like, fairly understandably, signing a player from the Brazilian 4th division. But what have we been talking about for the last couple of years? We need to get the players before they're famous. We need the before they're famous types. This is what you have to do to get them. Because if William Saliba, if there is an 18-year-old centre-back out there who is good enough to come and fix Arsenal's defence now, he's not coming to Arsenal. He's going to go somewhere bigger for more money. So we've got to get in there before these players become that player, or before the world realises they are. So I see Martinelli and Saliba as part of the same project, really, which is that they're gambles. I mean, Saliba sounds like he's going to be an expensive one, so they must be quite sure. But this is the type of thing you have to do. Get Martinelli before he goes to Corinthians or Sao Paulo and plays well there, and then his price goes up to 20 million, 30 million. Everton at Gremio, for example, nobody got him, and now he's gone and won like the Golden Boot at the Copa America, and now
we got linked recently, but too big for us probably now, right?
Not happening. If we'd have been in before Copa America, maybe, but now no. And this is what I mean, like getting these players before they even go to the big club in Brazil, because then they become expensive. So, I'm not saying that Martinelli will work. In fact, I think it's most likely it won't work. But this is what you have to do. If you want the before they're famous types, that means that you're not excited when they actually sign for you because you don't know if they're any good yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we know that a lot of the players we sign aren't good. So, I mean,
it's what we used to do, though, isn't it? We used to do this all the time, didn't we? And we stopped doing this, and we used to do it, with some of the young African players. Then we went into Europe, with the Seth Bentner type era, the Nielsen type era.
Colo Torre worked out, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this is what we used to do. And you said something a while back, Elliot. We're going back to that. At that moment in time, no one else was really doing it. We were forced to do it. Now it's becoming vogue. It really is becoming vogue because the Neymar 200 million transfer a couple of years ago has taken this market into a place where it's just not sustainable. So if you don't get smart, get ready to be taken over by other people with more oil money, for example. So we've got to do this, and it's going to be painful. But, we talked a lot about Koscielny, but I'm telling you, those players, they need to go.
You know what it is? Look,
really quick.
The transfer market is roulette. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But even at the roulette table, there's safer bets. You can bet on red, bet on black. Those are 50-50. You can also pick a specific number, and those pay out huge if they hit. Gambles like Martinelli are putting a little bit of money on a specific number. That can't be your only transfer strategy. You can't take your whole budget and put it on specific numbers because the odds are too long. You want a good blend of some higher likelihood hits that you have to pay a little more for, and then a blend of a couple of these shots that you take. A Guendouzi, for example, a Martinelli, for example, and you hope they hit too. And that's what we're doing, and it's what we have to do. I think we should leave it there because Scott's going to come on with a little bit of statistics before we wrap this up. We can talk about sales next time. We got a lot more to talk about, but I'm going to LA. My flight leaves tomorrow. I'm going to be doing a live Arscast in LA. There's all kinds of information at the Arsenal America site. We'll have some stuff on social media. Ars Blog will obviously have stuff on his fantastic blog. You should check it out. It is arsblog.com is where you can find that. Highly recommend it. Paul, I currently have you muted, so if you unmute, I can say goodbye to you. Paul is on Twitter at Poznan in my pants. Thank you, Paul.
Woohoo!
Woohoo indeed. It's a little bit retro today. That's fine. Tim, who is back, and we are thrilled to have him, is on Twitter at Stoberto. Thank you, Tim.
Bakary Sagna forever.
Yeah, the once and future captain. Who knows? Maybe we'll sign him back. He's not playing right now. He's keeping himself in shape. So something to think about. Can play center back a little bit too. Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thank you, Clive.
Thank you very much.
We're going to take a break, play a little bit of rights-free music, because that's what we got to do these days. And when we're back, Scott will tell us how bad things really are. Can't wait. Stay with us. Back, and now I am pleased, or hopefully will be pleased, I don't know, it depends on what he has to say, pleased to be joined by Scott. You can find him on Twitter at @O_that_crab. Hello, Scott.
Yeah.
Yeehaw, indeed. Hey, happy 300th episode, my friend. So glad that you have been around for a lot of it here and on Patreon and sharing interesting statistics on Discord and on the website and the articles you've written. It's been great. Oh, and of course the YouTube shows, which we'll be going back to in a little over a week. We are both off to California, albeit at slightly different times, but hope to have some good stuff for everybody, videos and recordings and live footage and stuff while you're out there. So a lot to look forward to. So thank you so much.
Well, let me just clarify that. I'm not off to California. I'm just going to a different part of California.
Yeah, okay, braggart. That's right. Scott is a California person who is going to another part of California. I am going to California. Either way, the semantics are what we expect from you because you are about data and accuracy and specificity, and we appreciate that. So let's get specific. What we want to do right now, look, there's been a lot of debate about are we close to the top four? Are we not close to the top four? Did we show improvement last season? We finished higher on points, one position higher up the table, right there for top four, but unfortunately, got to rain on that parade. There's some statistics that indicate that all is not rosy, in case you hadn't noticed. I think that Chelsea and United are potential dumpster fires waiting to happen. And that means a top four spot could be right there for the taking. But the numbers are worrying, and we're going to have to do better than we did last season significantly in terms of performances if we want to take the opportunity that may well be presented to us. So, Scott, let's dive in. What's the first underlying metric that you want to look at that gives context to the struggles we had last season?
So for me, one of the things I've been posting lately, so this was something that I was actually kind of doing new over the summer here, was kind of taking a look at what, say, the defense did versus the offensive average output in a match. So just, basically what would you expect a team to do versus what then did they actually produce against, say, Arsenal. And one of the things that actually popped out to me was that Arsenal, actually let teams do better than really expected. So that's may or may not be a surprise to people. It wasn't really a huge surprise to me. The biggest surprise to me actually was when I broke it down into, say, tiers of the teams that Arsenal faced. The biggest ones that were surprising to me is that the mid-table and the relegation zone teams, I actually have it. So mid-table is the teams 7 to 14, and relegation battlers were 15 and below. Both of those teams seem to actually do significantly better than average against Arsenal than they did against everybody else, and that was quite worrying. Arsenal were actually surprisingly quite good against the other top 6 teams, and actually keeping them below their season averages. So I think that is something that is definitely going to be a big worry, and maybe something that Arsenal are not going to get the same amount of points against those teams if they repeat the same performances going into next season.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, when you take the worst teams in the league and allow them to perform better than they usually do, that's not a good sign, because when the worst teams in the league play the biggest clubs in the league, they should perform significantly worse than they do. Is that the case with the other big clubs? Did they hold those teams to worse performances?
That is definitely the case with the other big teams. So, you expect, the best teams to be able to do about average, maybe a little bit above, maybe a little bit below. But against, when you have just significant talent edges, you expect that to show. And that was the case with all of the other big teams, especially Liverpool and Manchester City.
Well, right, of course. But even the ones that we would expect we could creep up on, like United and Chelsea, did better. And you know what's funny? Sometimes the stats tell you that a narrative concept you had been developing in your head is wrong. And sometimes they confirm it. And I think it's funny because if you ask most fans about Emery last season, you'd say, I was impressed with how he improved us in some of the big games. Beating Spurs, beating Chelsea, beating United, drawing Liverpool. I was impressed with how he improved us in some of those games, but we weren't as good as we should have been against the lesser teams. We didn't beat up on the dross the way we should have. And it sounds like the statistics bear out that conclusion.
Exactly. So yeah, it's always good to check what you see with your eyes, and if, maybe then also gives you ideas about or maybe you can look at different things. So this definitely was something that was confirmed by what I saw, right. And it was quite a departure from what we had come to expect under Arsene Wenger.
Literally the opposite.
Exactly. Yeah. Do so bad against the top 6 teams, but absolutely dominate the rest.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a bit of a surprise. From the departure from what we expected in the past.
It's unfortunate because as much as I think we're all ready for change, and again, I'm not looking back on that in any way, but if you want to be a perennial top 4 team, obviously you need the points against the little teams. Those have to be secured. We got top 4 plenty of years being terrible against the rest of the top 4 / top 6. But you got to beat up on the bottom half. So Emery's going to have to improve that. How about another one? I see that you've been doing a lot of passing modeling, looking at deep completions. So passes completed in the box, passes completed within 15 yards of goal, allowed and completed. So do you want to take a look at that? Is that something that you have found sort of interesting correlations with the finish in the table and performances overall?
Yeah, I mean, so unsurprisingly, the fewer passes that you allow close to your goal, the less shots that you allow close to your goal, and the less goals that you give up. There's actually a very, very strong correlation between all of those, between XG and very deep completion. So those would be passes within 15 yards of your goal. There is an 80% correlation between those. So a very strong.
So in other
connection.
words, if you want to have a good defense according to XG, the best place to start is not allowing the team to get within 15 yards of your goal. Don't allow deep completions. We might expect a team like Burnley to break that model where they allow you deep, but they block a lot of shots.
And it's actually a little bit different. So this was actually similar to what the Wolves model is. So they will allow, I guess, medium deep completions, but they are very stingy at the very deep completion. So they basically wall you off to where you cannot get the ball really past the penalty spot and in.
Past the penalty box at all, or with the penalty spot. Yeah, 15 yards. Okay, so let's look at how Arsenal compared there against some of the other big clubs. I mean, I'm going to go out on a limb and say in terms of the deep completions allowed, we probably let up more than we should have.
Yeah, so Arsenal were actually pretty good in the medium zone. So that one that's, the 25 to 15, they were actually pretty good at keeping people out of that zone. In that one, I basically look at just the central zone so that, you don't look at passes that are, down by the corner flag necessarily. So those ones don't count. So Arsenal do really well at keeping people out of the medium, deep central zones. Better than, I think they were about a seventh in the league in that spot. But then when you get into the deep and very deep, that starts to see where they slip and really diverge from the other top 6 teams. And you'll see some of the teams like, the Wolves. Wolves were actually one of the teams that was, most impressive to me in their bend and don't break style defense, where Arsenal really kind of slipped. On the offensive side of things, Arsenal actually looked pretty good in their ability to actually complete passes in there. We do still have good creative players in this team. We weren't at quite the elite level of Manchester City, Liverpool, or Chelsea, but we were right there with them, not super far behind, better than Tottenham or Manchester United.
I want to pull this apart a little bit. So first, let's go back to the allowed. I don't think you told us where we actually ranked. So where did we rank for that?
So in the medium completions, I believe we were 7th. Mm-hmm. In the deep and very deep, we were 10th and 11th.
Yeah, so that's not great, especially with an 80% correlation to XG allowed. So, but as far as completing them, what do you do with wide spaces? Because we know that we had this meme of get it to the wings, and we did that a lot, but that may not be as dangerous in terms of the possession. So do you do deep completions that go out to the wings still count in your model? And is that something that maybe accounts for why we were so good at it?
So, deep completions. So let's get the definitions here. So very deep are passes from 0 to 15 yards from the center of the goal. So that's basically drawing a half circle that basically goes about a yard and a half past the penalty spot, because I believe the penalty spot's about 13 yards.
Basically places that if you get a shot from there, it's probably a big chance.
Yeah, very, very good. So then deep completions are from 15 to 25. And then I have ones that are 25 to 35, but that is only looking in the central, so it's basically the half spaces.
So you're trying to isolate areas. Dangerous, hurtful balls and not really bring in the sort of meaningless spraying it to the wings kind of stuff. So that's helpful. So where did we rate in terms of those deep and very deep completions?
So at the very deep completions, we were actually 3rd. So Manchester City, Liverpool, Arsenal. Deep completions and medium deep completions, we were 4th. So Chelsea edged above us.
So let me ask you a question then. I mean, if we completed the 3rd most deep completions, in other words, people were getting the ball, Arsenal players had the ball within 12, was it 12 yards?
15 yards.
Within 15 yards of the goal. That's close. You're in there.
No, those are very good shots.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, no. So what I'm saying, if we were 3rd in completing passes into those zones, isn't it? I know that you're going to come up and tell me momentarily that we were poor at getting off shots and poor at getting big chances. So who's the burden fall on? If we're getting the ball into places where we should have had big chances, is the problem with our wingers maybe not taking enough shots? Is the problem that Lacazette isn't taking enough shots? I mean, we know Aubameyang is a high XG but low shot volume kind of guy. I mean, what do you attribute it to? Because you would suggest that if you're getting the ball within 12 yards of the goal, that you've done the job in build-up, and the failure has been not getting a shot from that spot. So where do you point the finger there?
I don't know. I mean, to me, I think that's a process thing or everything that you're doing process-wise went right. I think I don't think that we have necessarily players that can't get the shots off, and that's something that if we repeated that next year, I would be very happy.
That's very interesting, Scott. I got to tell you. I think that's a fascinating statistic because XG only picks up on where shots are taken. And I know we were bad at taking shots and bad at big chances last year. But you're telling me we were actually quite good at getting the ball into very hurtful spots. So maybe is it a tiny silver lining that we got the ball into really hurtful spots? And if we can continue to do that and turn that hurtful possession into shots. Because I will tell you, again, another narrative thing. One thing I banged on about a lot on Twitter, and I saw a lot of people complain about, I felt we got the ball in a lot of good spaces that we didn't convert into chances this season. And the data bears that out. So that maybe that's easier to turn around than we think. Is that possible?
It's possible because I think, so I know we do talk a lot about the cutbacks and, those kinds of things. We're cutback FC now. Those are incredibly dangerous and very good chances to create. And that's exactly really what you want to be doing. It's something that Manchester City do so much, but when they do it, they turn into goals. When Arsenal were doing it, they were, just turning into shots, or they were turning into
not shots. Yeah.
Or not shots. And I think that the process part is right. That's exactly what we want to do. We want to create dangerous spots. And I think that we have the talented enough people that if we're getting the ball into these dangerous zones, eventually it should, bear out that we'll get better shots. We'll get more goals from that. Part of the thing too is that, you think about it, you only really get, 4 or 5 of these in a game. So it can be a pretty small sample size over, a season where, a couple of these not turning into shots, really kind of skews things. So I think it's positive that Arsenal are doing this. And I'm not going to say that, there's an issue here. If there was something that says that Arsenal were not creating these dangerous opportunities, that's when I would be worried. I'm more worried about the allowed, than the created.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I think that is the most encouraging, as weird as it sounds, statistic I've heard about Arsenal this season, because I felt that our attack was really pretty poor. But if we were getting the ball within 12 yards of the goal at a rate that was better than everyone but Liverpool and City, there's hope for us. But the problem is they weren't turning into shots. So let's talk shots, because this is really bad. Our shot differential, our big chances, our shots for, all of those metrics, not what we want them to be.
Exactly. So, you look at the pure shot numbers, and Arsenal had a negative shot differential, and that is something that is definitely not positive. All of the other big teams were definitely in the positive range, some of them very significantly so. So that is something that, you typically do not see. Arsenal just did not create a lot of shots, period. They were 11th in the league in total shots. And for the amount of attacking talent on this team, that is really not acceptable. You
think it's an indictment of the wide players? I mean, is that where it is, or do you think it's an indictment of maybe just conservative formations, not having an extra attacker on? Where do you put the blame there?
Part of it is my thing is that Emery a lot of times really only lined up with the 3 attacking players. The only time the offense really seemed to be clicking was when we had Aaron Ramsey actually as a midfielder, and everybody knows that he is very good at creating the overloads in the offensive side, where he will be the 4th attacker from deep. And so Arsenal were able to get 4 full attackers into the game. And that's something that I think Arsenal need to be able to find a way to get a 4th attacker. So if Emery wants to go with that 4-2-3-1, I think that is definitely going to be better than, the 3-5-2 that we did, or the 3-4-3 whatever it was that Arsenal liked to do last year.
3-4-3.
So that is something that I think is going to be important, is to be able to have that 4th attacker. But also that 10 has to be able to give, strength and solidity to the midfield.
Yeah. Well, I guess then the question is, what did we wind up doing in terms of the quality of the chances we created? I know that big chances are the gold mine, right? That's where you're expected to score. That's where Aubameyang feasts.
Typically about a 40% chance.
Yeah, so I would expect that City and Liverpool had tons of them. We didn't exactly have tons of them, did we?
No, we didn't have a ton of them. So it's something that I'm definitely worried about. I think we ended up about even overall on the season, and that's definitely not great. And again, it's an indictment of our defense more than I think the offense. We just let people in too easily into dangerous spots. So I really hope that is something that can be addressed next year. I'd love to see Arsenal be able to create more. And I think, again, it's the underperformance against the weaker teams. And that's something that, yes, Arsenal were able to get more points against them this year than, probably expected. But if you continue the type of performances that they had, that's not something that you would bet to repeat.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's finish with XG. Look, I know there are people that are sick to death of XG. They're just sick of hearing about it. And clearly XG has flaws. But as far as a statistic that correlates as closely as possible with the points you're going to pick up, the goals you're going to score and concede, and where you're going to finish in the table, it does a pretty damn good job. And, it tends to give you a truer sense of what you can expect going forward from the club. Are you playing like a top 4 team? Are you playing like not top 4 team? This is where I worry. Our XG difference is a mid-table team, correct?
Yeah, it totally is. We were a lot closer to the mid-table than the other team. So Tottenham did not have a great, expected goal difference. They were another team that, pretty significantly overperformed. So I'm not sure if that's, Pochettino magic or whatever it is. But they were only about plus 13. Manchester United was another team that was not great. They were plus 11. And then in 7th place is Wolves, and they're plus 10. Then you get Arsenal at plus 9. So Arsenal are closer to Leicester they're at almost 6, and then they were to Tottenham, who is 13. So that's something that is definitely worrying, that we're closer to the teams that are chasing us than the teams that we are chasing.
And by comparison, like a team like Chelsea that we feel we were very close to, in fact, according to XG difference, we weren't very close at all.
No, I think they were, pretty significantly the third best team that probably just went through a finishing slump there at that, probably the 4/5 part of the season, that second or that 80th, percentile, games. Yeah. So that was part of the thing where, it was sorry out and everybody was, up in arms, but then they actually finished quite well, got the points needed to be able to come into the top 4.
Well, so let's get your professional opinion now, Doctor. So you look at all the metrics and you say Chelsea lose a manager who's a competent manager to Juventus and get a guy who has very little experience.
I'd say he's more than a competent manager. I think that Sarri is a very good manager, and I think that's something that's going to hurt them.
Well, let's put it this way. Whether you think he's very good or competent, I don't think anyone's prepared to say Frank Lampard is as good as him. So they downgrade at manager.
No, yeah, definitely.
They lose the best player in the Premier League. United have a joke of a manager, and their squad is kind of in disarray, and they may be losing some of their key players. Spurs still may lose players. We're not sure, but they lost 20 games in total last season. When you look at our metrics, do you think that the statistics you look at of how we played last season, and assuming that the squad isn't going to look a hell of a lot different because it looks like it's not going to, do you think that those other teams are in enough trouble with their situations that we can overcome a statistical disadvantage to them that may be greater than we expected, or are you worried that we may be sliding further back, not getting closer?
It's a tough one. I think that 3rd through 8th place is going to be incredibly open next year. I think Tottenham probably are going to be better than, because they actually did go out and spend some money this summer, because that's something that was super surprising. That I guess they were financing a stadium, so they decided that they didn't want to spend any money. We remember those years, but they've actually gone out and bought Ndombele from Lyon, who is a very, very good midfielder. That was somewhere that they were really hurting last season, and that fills a major gap for them. They haven't lost any of their attacking talent yet. So I think that Spurs probably will be the 3rd best team. And then fighting for that 4th place between Chelsea, Manchester United, Wolves, Leicester, maybe Everton. I think there's going to be some good fight there for that 4th through 8, 9 spots.
Yuck. That's just what I want to hear.
Yeah. Chelsea are definitely going to be in a weird situation. They've gone and I guess they did their transfer ban to arbitration, to the the Court of Arbitrations for Sport, but they haven't had their transfer ban stayed yet. I think I saw somebody on Twitter tell me that they're actually maybe willing to stand pat and let it go for this summer, because they've already made a couple of moves in the winter where they were able to register Kovacic and Pulisic. So they might just stand pat with that, and then brings back some of their loan army. If so, I think that they're losing Hazard, and that's a big thing to miss. And they got Willian, who's getting old, and Pedro, who's old. Who are they having as striker? Are they going to go all time with Giroud? So they have lots of questions. So, and a possible transfer ban where they may not be able to answer them. Manchester United, they bought in Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who I think is a very good right back, probably the best defensive right back right now, at least in the league. And
but
I think
maybe
that
not
his
much of an
attacking
attacker. So,
Yeah, I think his attacking numbers will look better on Manchester United than they did at Crystal Palace. So I think that's something that I would expect him to do better. But that's something where I think Manchester United have enough attacking talent to where, you don't necessarily need it from the fullback. But they do have a manager who has, quite a bit of question marks about him. They might be losing Pogba. It looks like Lukaku's on his way out. So they have a lot of question marks too. We all know the question marks for Arsenal. Wolves, their big thing is, can they do better against the bad teams? So they have similar questions to Arsenal. So can they do better when they are the favorites? I actually am very impressed with Leicester. I think they've made some pretty good moves, and they are really going to put in a strong fight to get into the top 4. And I think they could possibly do it. That might be my dark horse pick to get past everybody.
Great. Well,
so I think it's
Leicester,
going to be interesting. I think Arsenal are going to be in it unless things absolutely fall apart early in the season.
Yeah.
I don't expect them to be the favorites, but they'll have maybe a 15% chance probably to start the season.
It's tough, right? I mean, you see this vulnerability in the teams that would ordinarily be the ones you'd expect to keep us out of the top 4, and that opening is there, but our shoelaces are tied together. We can't seem to get out of our own way and get into a position to take advantage of the opportunity. It reminds me a little bit of like when Leicester won the title. Again, couldn't get out of our way and just win the title when it was there for us. Top 4 is there for us, and I just worry that we can't quite get out of our way. I guess we'll just have to see what happens. I mean, if there's one statistic that you look at of all the ones that you were measuring, other than just obviously XG difference, that you'd like to see us get better at, is it the big chances allowed? I mean, is that the one we have to clean up if we want to move up the table?
So I think that I really want to see the deep completions, and I mean now that I'm looking at it, I really want to see the improvement against the bottom table teams. Especially the teams that are in the bottom third, maybe even the teams that are in that 10th and below. So I want to see us to actually go out and just dominate them, because it's a high variability sport. So when you give more chances for variability to strike against you, you are more likely to drop points in those games. So I would rather just go out there and just dominate those teams. That's what Manchester City do, and that's how they basically go into those matches, and they collect all the points. So you really do need to beat the teams that you're expected to beat, and hope for Arsenal aren't going to win a title. So really, if you can get draws, maybe get a win at home against your top 6 rivals, that's better, but really look for a draw away. Even if it's some of the other teams in the top half, win at home, draw away, that's awesome, but beat the teams below you.
Have a safe trip to LA. We'll talk to you out there.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely talk to you out there. Hope you have a good trip too. And
thanks.
It's too bad we're going to be missing each other by day.
Yes, but you know what? We'll have everything covered between the two of us, and that's what matters. Scott's on Twitter at @O_that_crab. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter. Yankee Gunner. Give us a 5-star review. Write nasty things about no one. It's our 300th episode. Write nice things. Write beautiful, loving things. And sign up for our Patreon. Or don't, because even if you don't, we love you and we appreciate you. And we will talk to you after. What's the first game? Is it Colorado? It's Colorado.
Yeah, the Rapids.
We got a game to talk about. We'll talk to you after Arsenal 10, Rapids 0.